There are a few ways to study that make us better at learning. Start with daily habits. These habits are little actions that we start doing, and together these actions add up to give us the result we want. For example, if you decide you need 2 hours to study per day, you may decide to watch a half an hour less television. You may decide to wake up a half an hour earlier. Or you may decide to spend a half an hour less on social media and cook extra meals on the weekend. Successful people are careful with their daily habits. To begin good study habits, start by making a negative habit difficult. For example, leave your phone in another room when you need to study so that it's not a distraction. Forming a new habit depends on you. The good news is that if you practice a new habit, it becomes an automatic behavior. How long it takes you to form a new habit depends on you, but on average, it's about 2 months. So let's begin good study habits now. And we're back with our guests, Melissa and Thandeka. We're going to talk about some effective study techniques and strategies. Where do we start? So we have our first course material in front of us. It's an online course or it's a face-to-face course. And now there's all this exciting new content. Thandeka, where do we start?
I think for me, the best place to start is getting a full grasp of your basic concepts. That will give you confidence going forward in making sure that you understand. I think it's so important to not be so critical on ourselves when we are starting to study that we won't understand everything. I think that is the purpose of learning, is that you will, as you evolve in the course and as you take your time to learn the different mechanisms or the different topic areas that you need to cover in the course, you'll become well versed, but you need to understand the basics first. And I think that's where you get comfortable and you also get confident in yourself. And I also think taking regular breaks is very important because that can also give you a bit of zest for learning the new topic area or the new content that needs to be covered. If you take enough time for yourself to just breathe, go outside, get some sunlight. If it's raining, just get a bit of cold, fresh air into your brain just to revitalize yourself. I think that is so important because you're not really meant to sit at your desk for 4 hours on end because you probably won't end up feeling like you've learned anything anyway because you can get distracted. So giving yourself frequent breaks within the hour, I think will give you a better chance at finalizing how much you want to study in a day.
100% I agree. I would always start what I thought was like the easiest topic. And when I would learn the easiest topic, it was a little bit of a pat on the back and yes, I can do this. And then I'd move on to something a little bit more complex. Melissa, what would you add?
So absolutely, Seema, you're so correct. I know for me, sometimes the hardest part is just getting started. So if you can start with something a bit easy, a bit simple, and then you're in it and you can continue instead of trying to do something very heavy and dense when you start off, which might be a bit discouraging. So you're 100% correct. Starting with something small and simple, the most basic concept is always the way to go. Another thing I would recommend is, we spoke a little bit about study schedules earlier, is sharing it with your family, just to make sure that they know as well that this is mom's study time or this is dad's study time, and not to disturb you, not to distract you, that this is really important time that you need in order to achieve your goals.
So that would be not just a little distractor when the family was rolling through in my study space, but I couldn't stay organized when that was happening because the little one's there with my highlighter and I'm trying to keep my notes together. So staying organized was also a point of departure for me. I would try to get my study materials organized and my little study area organized. Thandeka, your views on how we prep a conducive study environment?
Absolutely, and I think one thing we can't forget is that our spaces are not the same. You might find your study desk being a dining room table or your couch or your bed. But what you need to do is that organization process. What works for you? having your notes tidied up in the right place, your color-coded files, your highlighters, anything that makes you want to study and want to go to that study space is very, very important. We're not going to all have the luxury of having a study room or a dedicated study space, depending on how many people we also have in our household. But I think what is quite important is those tools and materials that we use. We want to keep those structured and safe so that we are comfortable when we enter that studying space. And also figuring out how we like to study. You know, some people do mind maps, some people like to write notes on end, some people just want to highlight. That also creates the structure and the environment that you want to work in. And that also makes you a little bit more organized and plan your day more effectively for your studies.
Absolutely, Thandeka. And, you know, carving out that time, making that special space for your studies is really the ideal circumstances for active learning to happen.
What is active learning? This is also a term that we hear a lot in class. Lecturers, facilitators are saying, engage actively with your material. So I'm wishing for you to explain to our audience, how do we engage actively with our material, with our content? Because it suggests that when we are embarked on active learning, we're absorbing more, we're able to use it better. Tell us about that, Melissa.
Absolutely. So active learning, what that really means is going beyond just, you know, listening in class or the written material. It's engaging with the material on another level. So for example, if you are making summaries of your chapters, or you're making flashcards, or you're summarizing to another person, explaining some of the concepts, that's what active learning is. So going above and beyond just the written word or what you hear in class, that's what active learning is. And many of us do it in any case, you know, just to make sure that you are digesting and engaging with that information. It's the best way that you're going to be understanding, you're going to be reviewing, you're going to be applying that information in your life. And so with that, a good, you know, something essential is taking good notes. So this means that you're not just sitting in class, or you're not just reading what's on your computer screen in the case of online learning, but it is making those notes and in the format that works for you. So those might be bullet points, they might be symbols, they might be color-coded, you know, whatever works for you. But taking really good notes means that not only are you digesting the information as you write it down, but it's also going to make it a lot easier for you once you reach the review process later.
So active learning, if I'm understanding you correctly, is about actually understanding the content. And when you do these steps that you mentioned, apart from listening in your online lecture or reading your textbook, it's about making notes, bullet points, maybe little diagrams for yourself. Somehow or the other, your brain is now understanding this in a way that you can perhaps explain it to somebody else. And that was also a technique that I read about. Maybe you can tell me more about this, Thandeka, but I saw a resource that suggested if you've learned something actively, it's good to explain it to somebody else, because the understanding deepens. Almost when you're in teacher mode, your understanding deepens and comes out in that process where you're explaining it to somebody else.
I completely agree. So it's a form of revisiting or revision in terms of your work, but in a different way, you know, not by just reciting, but by giving yourself an audience to almost practice on, so that you can actually understand and deep dive into how it articulates, how your mind articulates it, and whether you can actually intertwine it with other things that you've learned. So that it's not just a standalone, but you can actually see that there's different subject areas, content areas that you've seen this before or this concept before, and you're able to actually merge that understanding. And I don't think there's a perfect way in how we revise or how we actually understand what we learn, paper, verbally, or from online courses. I think that's all determined on a person's ability to to accelerate forward or to take their time. That's why I say you prepare yourself when there's exams or tests that need to be done. Some people are geniuses. They need to learn within an hour and they've got all the concepts mastered. And some people need to take a little bit longer because they have family responsibilities or they have working responsibilities, because most of us are in adult careers. So it is a difficult terrain, and I don't think there's a perfect fit for everybody, but I think what is important is understanding what works for you and also creating that environment to make sure that you can succeed.
So the two key takeaways is active learning, trying what works for you to understand your content, what you're studying, and revision as well. Revision seems to be a very important thing that you would do to make sure that that content stays within your memory. You retain it for longer. The one technique that I found when I was writing my exams was I spent a lot of time doing practice questions because it switched my brain from that mode of, okay, I understand what's being taught in this section, but when I did a practice question, my brain was being asked a question. And an interesting thing happened is that I started to actually respond in the practice questions before the assessment, before the test, before the exam. It took away a lot of the stress of the actual exam sitting, because I had seen similar questions before. I'd practiced how I would draft out my responses and my answers, and it turned out to be one of the most effective study techniques for me. It was just experimentation with different study techniques, and maybe that's what we should be encouraging our audience to do as well, is try different things, change up your learning approach. It keeps things fresh and interesting, and you learn a lot more about yourself as a learner. We're not the same. We learn in a variety of different ways. So this has been so informative. I think where we are actually right now is we're going to go to our next insert on learning styles, and that's a little bit more about how we prefer to learn as individuals. Each one of us has a preference for how we want to learn and how we want to engage with our content. So our next insert is going to give us some background on learning styles, and then we'll be back to unpack that with Melissa and Thandeka again.